In this lecture, I want to discuss how to understand financial data. The kind of financial data we'll be looking at is stock price data, along with volume information. If you've never studied finance before, you may have assumed that there is just a single stock price, the stock price, of a stock. However, in practice, stock price data is not represented that way. Instead, data is represented in this tabular form. We have the columns open, high, low, close, and volume. Sometimes we also have a column called adjusted close, which we will discuss later. Note that for the rows, each row corresponds to a day. But this does not necessarily have to be the case. You can also have weekly data, monthly data, or intraday data. Most commonly, however, in the study of financial analysis and financial engineering, we start by working with daily data. So what do these columns mean? Well, first, we recognize that no matter what the frequency of our data is, it represents a block of time. And within that block of time, the stock price will fluctuate. So the open, high, low, and close columns are meant to give us information about how the stock price changed during that block of time. I think it's pretty intuitive. The open price is the price at the beginning of the period. The close price is the price at the end of the period. The high price is the maximum price during that period, and the low price is the minimum price during that period. The volume is the total number of shares that were traded during that time period. Traded means that they were sold by someone and bought by someone else. If you want, it may be helpful to think of the stock market as a physical market that people can go to purchase various items. Anybody who goes to the market can buy and sell from anyone else. So for example, you go to the market and you carry a bag full of apples, Starbucks coffees, and some 3M N95 masks. You might think to yourself, due to current world events, I believe 3M masks are about to go up in value, so you might want to buy more in hopes of selling them at a later date for profit. So you might look over and find Bob, who wants to sell his N95 masks. So let's say Bob is willing to sell 10 masks for $5 each, and you're willing to buy them for that price. So you pay Bob $50, and in return, you now own 10 more N95 masks. This kind of exchange is happening many times per second, and the price of each item can change depending on what people are willing to buy and sell them for. In reality, these exchanges are done by a computer, and each transaction is stored in what is called an order book. Each event, called an order, means that someone has offered to buy or sell a stock at some price. In fact, it works more like an auction rather than a direct sale. You offer to buy or sell at a certain price, but that does not guarantee that any transaction will actually take place. Any transaction requires that someone is willing to buy at a price at or above the price that someone else is willing to sell. So the exchange collects these orders and matches them so that they can actually be executed. Sometimes the number of shares don't match up, and so some orders will only be partially filled. For example, you might try to purchase 10 shares at a certain price, but only 5 were available, so in the end, you end up only buying 5 shares. What is interesting is that the data we typically work with in finance, if we consider what actually happens in the stock market, what we actually have is more like a summary of those events. So you might wonder, is any useful information being lost in this process? That's a question which is outside the scope of this course, but something worth pondering on your own. One convenient aspect of such a summarization is this. When we order the stock price by day, we get what is called a time series. This will be a central data structure in this course. Time series methods often assume that your data is sampled at equally spaced intervals. So by having daily data, we automatically meet this constraint. Note that there is still one column of our data that we haven't yet discussed, which is the adjusted close. We'll discuss this in a later lecture since there are some important points to mention, but for now, let's focus on how to actually look at this data in Python. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next lecture.